Hello there. I have been, over the course of the last week or so when I had time, just been running on a small side project of mine, which was just kind of testing the differences between Soulbound and Infernal Roar. Because for all intents and purposes, a Soulbound set is 50% damage, Infernal Roar 40%. And up to now, it's mostly been the assumption that any champion that does just basic attack damage, so Comet, Setram, Valeria, Valk, blah 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 blah, is just perfectly fine running Infernal Roar, and will be objectively better on longer fights. And on shorter fights, say Arena, where those first few rounds matter a lot before the ults start fully popping and you've managed to cycle 5 ults, Infernal Roar is actually better for a lot of champions. Yeah. This seemed mostly conclusive. And that would have been absolutely fine. But, while testing this on an M4 with very similar sets, so this is an Infernal Roar and Soulbound Arcana difference here, there's virtually nothing difference-wise. There's a little bit of attack speed, but who cares, and there's 0.5% crit damage. And I also did a crit damage set. So if I go back to here, right, the sets I were using were basically the IR crit damage test, so 11,969 and 155.5, and 11,969 and 156.5. So that, plus the set that you can see here, is what I use as parameters for all of my testing. And I just ran a Carnelian and Vig, and then just some other random healers to cycle ults and get some test results. And we have Hatset being consistent with this. So Infernal Roar, she's doing a little bit less. We have Valk being consistent with this. Infernal Roar, she's doing a little bit less. Comet, I forgot the screenshot here, but it's the same concept. He's doing a little bit less with Infernal Roar. And then we get Setram. And Setram is doing 105.384 in Infernal Roar, but 98.247 in Soulbound Arcana. And I questioned this a whole bunch. I reran the thing a few times trying to figure out if I did something stupid or forgot an Vig on Setram or just did anything abnormal, and I could not get anything that made sense. It always ended up being back to these exact numbers. So I came up with basically 3 hypotheses. Either crit damage is somehow affecting this, or damage is somehow affecting this, because Setram does have his... He has 2 passives, one which just boosts his damage, and one that boosts his crit damage. Or simply the other factor, which could just be, hey, he's an Infernal Roar unit, he's an Infernal unit, Infernal Roar, and it's all some giant conspiracy by the devs. It's not that one. So I went ahead and I took Comet, who has none of these factors, and I used those sets I was talking about earlier, and I started adding in various factors. So first one I went with was just Ajax, who is A2 for me, so that's a 6% damage increase. And for Infernal Roar, that ended up being a 5.98 total damage percent increase, which was consistent with Ajax. For Soulbound, however, that was a 4% damage increase. And then I slapped a morale set on someone, and I got, 3.78 total damage increase for Infernal Roar, which roughly makes sense, but only 2.57 for Soulbound Arcana. Which then got me started on the whole, this is almost definitely damage, and nothing else that's actually causing this distinction and difference. So I kind of continued pushing that. I slapped a title ring on, and Infernal Roar versus Soulbound, we're now only at 1,000 damage difference. And that's when I kind of went back to my Setram, and I realized that he is the one that I did not remove an artifact from, and he was still running his Spirit Siphon. So he had a 30% damage increase from the Siphon, right, at full stacks, and then a 15% increased damage from Devastation. Hence why he was doing so much. And I did do the tests with the crit damage builds. It didn't yield any significant results. If you are actually interested in seeing those results, I can probably just dump them in the GitHub. I did include one, which was just slapping Orym in there and seeing if there was a significant difference in anything, but we're still ending up with Infernal Roar lagging about 1,000 damage behind Soulbound Arcana. So that probably wasn't a factor at all. On top of, again, actually running the tests, that made me realize that it just wasn't. And I'm glad to back this up with all of the other testing I did. It's just I didn't find any value in this because the Orym buff should fairly clearly explain this, and you can test this yourself. But the bottom line is that any champion who has a significant damage percent increase from a passive, from a just skill. So some of these are champions like, if we go back to our champion list here, they're champions like, I don't have them actually, so this is why it kind of took a while to figure out, but Silas is a good example. Right, he has 20% extra damage. Actually, sorry, no. Damage increased by 60% on Shadow Cloak. So chances are he will be better in Infernal War, period, even on longer fights. He also has an extra 30% damage increase, so that's basically it. He will substantially be better in Infernal War in every single situation, in longer fights. Yovar does not have any of this. So chances are, unless he's having a different source of damage increase from, say, his artifact and various other factors, he will be better in Soulbound Arcana. Jira, somewhere around here, increases damage dealt by 125%. She will be vastly better in Infernal Roar because of that damage increase. And there are probably a lot of other champions that will fall under this, that would theoretically be better in Soulbound, but simply are not. Obviously, this does not factor in champions like Boreas, because his basic attack damage is just garbage anyways. Nobody cares about the basic attack. Most of his attack comes from Frosty Endowment, from the Ice Haven, from the Stalactites, basically a bunch of stuff that is not the basic. All this to say that, yeah, any team, comp, really anything, like say for example if you were running Laya and her uptime was extremely consistent, maybe all of your champions that do a significant amount of basic attacks are better with Infernal Roar anyways. Alistair, I don't believe he just has attack percent increases. Yeah, so it's not necessarily the case, but since it's Alistair, and if you run him in a Hope team, and you have Final Verdict going, Sacred Blessing, what is explained already? It doesn't. Great. Wait, it's right here. All damage plus 50%. That's a threshold at which it's more worthwhile to have Infernal War. And Alistair doesn't really need, he just doesn't really matter to have Soulbound because he has no special attacks. And at this point, this is also then true for Valk if you're running her in a Kratos team. To an extent, depends on how fast you cycle that Final Verdict, or Verdict of Truth. All this to say that at this point I'm basically just rambling. The baseline conclusion is just the more you get other sources of damage, the better Infernal Roar will become, and Soulbound will not, eventually just will not keep up. And this is because, as far as I can tell, Soulbound Arcana will be additive with any other source of damage increase. And Infernal, to an extent, is going to be multiplicative. Because they drop in at different points of the formula. So my assumption is that Infernal War is factored in before. Honestly, maybe it's even after, it doesn't matter. But they're factored in as two different increases. And if you've played PoE at all, it's kind of the difference between stacking increased damage and more damage. In this case, this would be kind of a more damage. So yeah, the link for the screenshots I had will be in my GitHub. I'll provide the link in the description of the video. And yeah, that's it. Hopefully this helps someone change their gear, optimize something. I don't really know, man. I had fun testing this. Cheers. Have a nice one.